Far away, beyond the whispering clouds, beyond the singing waterfalls, and beyond the giggling mushroom forest, there existed a magical land called Dragonoria. It was a land full of wonder and mystery, where mountains touched the stars, rivers sparkled like diamonds, and the sky changed colors every single hour. But in all of Dragonoria, there were only 2 dragons, and both of them were very, very lonely. On the tall, sparkling peak of Frostbite Mountain, there lived a dragon named Crystalwing. Crystalwing was the most beautiful creature you could ever imagine. Her scales shimmered like 1,000 tiny icicles, blue and silver and white, catching every little ray of moonlight and scattering it into rainbows. When she breathed, soft clouds of frosty air puffed out of her nostrils, and wherever she walked, delicate snowflakes would drift down and settle like tiny stars on the ground. Her eyes were the color of a deep, frozen lake, clear and blue and full of quiet sadness. Snowflake # snowcapped mountain # sparkles crescent moon gemstone. Crystalwing loved to do many things. She loved to build magnificent castles out of pure ice, with towers that spiraled up so high they poked through the clouds. She loved to make snowflake patterns in the sky, each one different from the last, each one more beautiful than anything you've ever seen. She loved to sing softly to the moon at night, her voice like tinkling bells and rustling snow. But every time she finished a beautiful ice castle, or every time she completed a perfect snowflake, or every time the last note of her moonlight song faded away, she would look around, and there was nobody there to share it with. Nobody to say, "Crystalwing, that is the most gorgeous castle I have ever seen." Nobody to clap their paws and say, "Wow, how did you make that snowflake?" Nobody to sing along with her under the stars. "I wish I had a friend," Crystalwing would whisper to the cold mountain wind. "Someone to play with. Someone to laugh with. Someone to share all my beautiful ice things with." The wind would swirl around her sadly, but it never answered back. On the very other side of Dragonoria, on the rumbling, glowing peak of Blazetop Volcano, there lived a dragon named Emberclaw. Emberclaw was just as magnificent as Crystalwing, though in a very different way. His scales were the deep, burning red of hot embers, streaked with gold and orange that seemed to actually glow from the inside. When he breathed, jets of brilliant orange and yellow flame shot out with a cheerful wh, and wherever he went, little sparks would dance around him like tiny fireflies. His eyes were the color of molten gold, warm and bright and a little bit lonely. Fire volcano high voltage sparkles glowing star. Emberclaw had many wonderful hobbies. He loved to carve beautiful sculptures out of hardened lava rock, fierce lions, soaring eagles, playful dolphins, and he had a whole gallery of them on his volcano's flat ledge. He loved to make firework shows all by himself, breathing different colors of fire up into the night sky, green, purple, gold, silver, in magnificent cascading showers of light. He loved to roast his favorite food, a special kind of giant marshmallow that grew near the volcano, and eat it while watching the sunset. But just like Crystalwing, every time he finished a magnificent sculpture, or every time the last firework faded from the sky, or every time he ate the last toasted marshmallow, he would look around, and there was nobody there. Nobody to say, "Emberclaw, that eagle looks so real." Nobody to gasp and cheer at the fireworks. Nobody to share marshmallows with. "I wish I had a friend," Emberclaw would sigh to the crackling flames of his volcano. "Just one friend. That's all I need." The flames would crackle and pop, but they never answered back either. And so, both dragons lived alone, Crystalwing on her frozen mountain in the west, Emberclaw on his blazing volcano in the east. Between their 2 homes lay the Dark Valley, a shadowy place that neither dragon had ever dared to cross. Everyone in Dragonoria believed something that was told from old times, that ice dragons and fire dragons could never, ever be friends. "They are too different," the old legend said. "One will always melt the other. They cannot be near each other. It has never happened before and it never shall." Any bright and golden morning in the middle of the year, something most extraordinary happened. Both Crystalwing and Emberclaw had the very same idea at exactly the very same time. They both decided to fly to the Rainbow Meadow, a beautiful field of wildflowers right in the middle of Dragonoria, halfway between Frostbite Mountain and Blazetop Volcano. It was said that in Rainbow Meadow, the most magnificent rainbow in the whole world appeared every single morning, stretching from one end of the meadow to the other, full of every color you could ever imagine. Crystalwing had been wanting to visit Rainbow Meadow for years and years, but she had always been too nervous to leave her mountain. What if she flew too close to the volcano side? What if she shivered at the thought, a fire dragon. But that morning, something felt different inside her chest. She felt a tiny warm spark of courage. She spread her shimmering blue-silver wings wide, took a deep breath of cold mountain air, and launched herself into the sky with a graceful swoop. Just this once, she told herself, her icy wings beating strongly. I'll go look at the rainbow. Just this once. And I'll be back before anyone notices. At almost the exact same moment, over on Blazetop Volcano, Emberclaw had been admiring a beautiful rainbow in the distance for weeks from his high perch. He had tried to paint it in lava rock, but it just wasn't the same as seeing it up close. So that morning, he decided, today was the day. He would go to Rainbow Meadow. He puffed up his magnificent red chest, spread his great glowing wings, and with a powerful WMP of hot air, he launched himself into the golden sky. Just for a quick look, he told himself, gliding on the warm air currents. I'll see the rainbow, then come straight home. Nobody from the cold side will even be there. Both dragons swooped down into Rainbow Meadow at almost the same moment, one from the west, one from the east, and landed with a loud thud-thud on the soft green grass. Then they both looked up. And they both froze solid. Face screaming in fear, Snowflake Fire face screaming in fear. There, standing just 30 steps away from Crystalwing, was a dragon, a fire dragon. He was enormous, and he glowed with a deep red-orange light, and little wisps of smoke curled lazily from his nostrils. Crystalwing had never seen anything so warm and bright in her entire life. Part of her wanted to run. Part of her, a tiny curious part, wanted to stay and look. And there, standing just 30 steps away from Emberclaw, was a dragon, an ice dragon. She was spectacular, shimmering with 1,000 shades of blue and white, and little flurries of snowflakes drifted down from her wings. Emberclaw had never seen anything so cool and glittering in his entire life. Part of him wanted to fly away immediately. Part of him, a tiny brave part, was absolutely fascinated. For a long, long moment, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Well, tiny puffs of frost and tiny wisps of smoke, but you know what I mean. They just stared at each other with wide eyes. Then something happened that neither of them expected. The rainbow, that glorious, giant, 7-colored rainbow, chose that exact moment to appear in its full magnificent splendor, arching directly over both of them, connecting where they stood like a giant colorful bridge between ice and fire. Both dragons looked up at it at the same time. And both of them breathed the same word at the same time. Beautiful. They looked back at each other. Emberclaw tilted his big red head to one side, looking puzzled and curious. Crystalwing tilted her shimmering blue head to the other side, looking equally puzzled and curious. And then, slowly, very slowly, both of them took one step forward. Hello, said Crystalwing, her voice coming out a little wobbly. I'm Crystalwing. I live on Frostbite Mountain. I came to see the rainbow. I wasn't expecting anyone else to be here. Hello, said Emberclaw, his deep warm voice sounding surprisingly gentle. I'm Emberclaw. I live on Blazetop Volcano. I came to see the rainbow too. I definitely wasn't expecting to meet an ice dragon. There was another long pause. Then, and this is the magical part, both of them started to laugh at exactly the same moment. It was just so funny, both of them having exactly the same idea on exactly the same day, both of them showing up at exactly the same time, both of them being completely surprised by each other. Crystalwing's laugh sounded like tinkling icicles. Emberclaw's laugh sounded like the comfortable crackle of a cozy fire. And together, the two sounds mixed into something wonderfully surprising. Something that made the flowers in the meadow turn their heads and the birds in the trees stop singing to listen. Rainbow, and just like that, under the most beautiful rainbow in Dragonoria, two very lonely dragons had their very first conversation. Rainbow. They talked for hours. Emberclaw told Crystalwing about his lava sculptures and his fireworks shows. Crystalwing told Emberclaw about her ice castles and her snowflake designs. They discovered something rather astonishing. They both loved singing, they both loved making beautiful things, and they both felt exactly the same way when they had nobody to share those beautiful things with. By the time the sun was getting sleepy and the sky was turning pink and orange, which Emberclaw pointed out looked a lot like the colors of his scales, which made them both laugh again, they had become something quite remarkable. They had become friends. Or at least, they were beginning to be. There the next few weeks, Crystalwing and Emberclaw met in Rainbow Meadow every single day. Each day they discovered new things about each other. They found out they both loved riddles. They both found clouds funny-shaped. Emberclaw thought a cloud looked like a sleeping bear. Crystalwing thought it looked like a dancing mushroom, and they argued about this for 20 minutes in the most cheerful way possible. And they both had a secret talent for juggling. Crystalwing juggled ice balls, Emberclaw juggled fireballs, and when they tried to juggle each other's balls, the results were wonderfully, hilariously disastrous. Life was becoming much less lonely for both of them. Crystalwing started building ice castles that had little warm alcoves in them, just in case Emberclaw ever came to visit, and Emberclaw started making fireworks shows with ice blue and silver colors, because they were his new favorite. But one afternoon, something went wrong. It started over something very small. They had been building something together for the first time, a bridge. A beautiful bridge that would span the dark valley between their two mountains, so they could visit each other whenever they liked without having to fly all the way to Rainbow Meadow. Crystalwing had been building the left half with ice, adding elegant arches and delicate crystal railings. Emberclaw had been building the right half with hardened lava rock, adding strong sturdy pillars and carved dragon faces on the columns. "Crystalwing," said Emberclaw, frowning at the place where their two halves were supposed to meet. "I think your side needs to be a little bit lower. The arch on my side is perfectly even." "Lower," said Crystalwing, her voice going cold, colder than usual, "even. My arch is perfectly measured. Your side is too high. You always think your way is the right way." "I never said that. I was just trying to help. Ice dragons are always so sensitive." "Sensitive. Fire dragons are always so bossy." The argument got louder and louder. Voices rose. Ice crackled. Flames flickered. And in all the noise and upset, neither of them noticed what was happening to the bridge. Crystalwing, furious, breathed a blast of ice at exactly the wrong moment, and it hit the middle section of the bridge. The ice connected with the still warm lava rock and crack crack crack. The whole middle section of the bridge split apart and tumbled down into the dark valley with a tremendous crash. Both dragons stopped shouting. They looked at the broken bridge. They looked at each other. And without another word, both of them turned around and flew home. Broken Heart Raincloud # Crying Face Raincloud # Broken Heart. That night was the most miserable night either of them had ever experienced, even more miserable than all those lonely years before, because now they knew what they were missing. Crystalwing sat at the very top of a frozen mountain and watched the dark valley sadly, her ice-blue eyes full of tears that froze before they fell and tinkled to the ground like tiny bells. Emberclaw sat on his volcano's highest ledge, his fire burning low and dim, staring at the far side of the dark valley where he could just barely make out the glimmer of Frostbite Mountain. Both dragons thought about what they had said. Crystalwing remembered saying fire dragons are always so bossy, and she knew, deep in her heart, that Emberclaw wasn't bossy. He was enthusiastic. He cared about things deeply. He just showed it differently than she did. Emberclaw remembered saying ice dragons are always so sensitive, and he knew, deep in his honest heart, that Crystalwing wasn't too sensitive. She was careful and thoughtful. She paid attention to beautiful details. She just showed it differently than he did. "I was unkind," Crystalwing whispered to the stars. "And now my best friend is gone. I said something hurtful," Emberclaw murmured to the embers. "And I miss my best friend terribly." 3 whole days went by. 3 days of silence, 3 days of no Rainbow Meadow visits, 3 days of lonely lunches and sad sunsets. The whole of Dragonoria seemed to feel it. The flowers in Rainbow Meadow drooped a little, the rainbow itself seemed slightly less bright, and even the wind seemed to sigh as it passed between the two lonely mountains. Sparkles, but sometimes, when you've done something wrong, the bravest thing in the world is simply to say 2 small but enormous words, "I'm sorry." Sparkles. On the 4th day, both dragons came to the same conclusion. At the same moment. They had a funny way of doing this, these two. They both took a deep breath, spread their wings, and flew toward the dark valley. They met right in the middle of the space where the bridge had been, hovering in midair, face to face, the cold wind from Crystalwing's wings and the warm air from Emberclaw's wings creating a little swirling pocket of perfect temperature between them. "I'm sorry," said Crystalwing, her voice soft and sincere. "I said something unkind. You were just trying to help with the bridge, and I snapped at you. You're not bossy. You're wonderful. I'm sorry." "I'm sorry too," said Emberclaw immediately, his warm golden eyes full of remorse. "I called you sensitive as if it was a bad thing. It's not. Being careful and feeling things deeply is beautiful. I'm sorry. There was a quiet moment. Then both dragons smiled. Crystalwing's smile like glittering sunlight on snow, Emberclaw's smile like the first warm flame of a cozy fire on a cold evening. And they reached out their great clawed paws and shook hands over the middle of the dark valley, the ice and fire touching without hurting each other at all, just creating a tiny warm, bright spark between them that floated up into the sky like a little star. The friendship was repaired. And unlike the bridge, it was stronger than ever before. Woe weeks after their apology and the repaired friendship, and the decision to rebuild the bridge properly. Together, this time, with no arguments, something frightening happened to Dragonoria. It started on a perfectly normal Tuesday morning. The sky went from blue to grey in about 15 minutes. The temperature dropped so fast that birds fell asleep mid-flight and had to be gently caught and brought indoors by the wind sprites. The clouds turned a deep, threatening colour, not just grey but a terrifying purple-black, like a giant bruise spreading across the entire sky. Then came the wind. Oh, the wind. It was not like any normal wind. This wind howled and shrieked and moaned, bending the great oak tree sideways, sweeping the flowers clean out of Rainbow Meadow, and making the mountains themselves tremble and shiver. And then came the snow. But this was not pretty, feathery, floaty snow like the kind Crystalwing made. This snow came down in thick, blinding sheets, sideways and upwards and in every direction at once. Cloud with snow hash, it was the great blizzard, the biggest, most terrible storm that Dragonoria had ever seen. And it wasn't just a snowstorm. It was alive. Cloud with snow. Crystalwing could feel the blizzard coming from far away. She could sense it through the ice and snow, the way you can feel a very loud sound in your chest before you hear it with your ears. But even she was shocked by its power. This storm was not natural. It was magical and ancient, the kind of storm that only came once every 1,000 years. A storm so cold and powerful that even ice itself would freeze harder and become brittle, and everything in its path would be locked under mountains of snow and ice for 100 years. The little creatures of Dragonoria were in terrible trouble. Crystalwing looked out from her mountain and could see, far below in the valleys, all the small and wonderful creatures of the land, the woolly hedgehogs, the miniature elephants, the blue foxes, the silver rabbits, the talking tortoises, all of them trying to run to safety but being overwhelmed by the blizzard's impossible speed. Their little homes were being buried. Their food stores were being frozen solid. The whole land was being covered in a blanket of magical ice that nothing could break through. "Oh no," breathed Crystalwing, her eyes wide with horror. "Oh no, oh no. They are going to be frozen in. All of them. I have to do something." She thought hard. She was an ice dragon. She could fly through the blizzard without being hurt by the cold. She could build shelters of ice. She could create pathways. She could slow down parts of the storm with her own ice breath. But the storm was enormous. It covered every corner of Dragonoria. She was just one dragon. She could save some creatures, maybe, but not all of them. And the worst part of the storm, the very heart of it, where it was hottest in its cold fury, was gathering right over the warm southern valleys, where the most creatures lived. And then she thought of Emberclaw. The warm southern valleys. Fire. Emberclaw's fire wouldn't hurt in this blizzard. It would help. His flames could melt pathways through the snow, create warm havens, push back the magical ice. But Emberclaw had never flown in a blizzard before. He was a fire dragon, and the cold would be dangerous for him. And the storm was heading directly for his volcano. Emberclaw. Crystalwing cried into the howling wind, launching herself off her mountain without a moment's hesitation. "Emberclaw, I'm coming. Hold on." She flew through the blizzard at full speed, her ice wings perfectly adapted for the freezing winds, slicing through the horizontal snow like a blue comet. Below her, she could see the creatures of Dragonoria struggling, but she couldn't stop yet. She had to reach Emberclaw first. Together, they could help everyone. Alone, they could help very few. On Blazetop Volcano, Emberclaw was having a very different kind of trouble. The blizzard was attacking his volcano directly, and for the first time in his life, his flames were struggling against something stronger than them. The magical blizzard ice was so cold that it was actually pushing back his fire, creeping up the sides of his volcano, threatening to extinguish the very heart of his home. And all around his mountain, he could see the creatures below being overwhelmed. "Crystalwing," he murmured, staring through the white fury of the storm toward the distant west. "Crystalwing, I wish you were here." And then, impossibly, wonderfully, he heard her voice in the howling wind. A clear, bright voice like crystal bells, cutting right through the noise of the storm. Emberclaw. I'm here. I'm coming. And through the wall of blizzard snow, like a comet made of light and ice, Crystalwing came blazing toward him. Ristalwing landed next to Emberclaw on the ledge of Blazetop Volcano, and for a moment they just looked at each other through the howling, screaming blizzard. The cold was extraordinary even for Crystalwing, and she could see that Emberclaw's flames were burning lower than she'd ever seen them. He was using all his energy just to keep warm enough to function. Ice was creeping up the volcano sides in thick sheets, getting closer and closer. Are you all right? Crystalwing shouted over the roaring wind. Getting cold. Emberclaw shouted back, and the words were almost funny if the situation hadn't been so serious. The creatures down in the southern valley, they're all trapped, Crystalwing. I tried to fly down to help, but the blizzard pushed me back. I know. I saw them on the way here. Listen, I have an idea, but it only works if we do it together. She quickly explained her plan. It was actually quite brilliant, and it used the best of both of them. Crystalwing, with her perfect understanding of ice and cold, would navigate and lead. She could feel where the storm's magical ice was thickest, where pathways could be opened, where the creatures were buried. Emberclaw, with his powerful flame and his ability to create lasting warmth even in impossible cold, would be the engine, melting pathways, creating warm havens, pushing back the magical blizzard ice with fire that was hot enough to break even ancient magic. But won't your ice and my fire just cancel each other out? Emberclaw asked, a small worried frown creasing his red brow. That's what everyone always says, said Crystalwing, and she smiled with a confidence she hadn't had before. But I think they're wrong. I think when my ice and your fire work together, really together, not just side by side, they make something new. Something neither of us can make alone. Emberclaw looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded firmly. Then let's find out. Together. Fire snowflake hash sparkles explosion symbol glowing star. What happened next was one of the most spectacular things ever seen in Dragonoria, and it would be talked about by creatures great and small for thousands of years. Crystalwing and Emberclaw flew down from the volcano together, wings beating in perfect synchrony, his warm air and her cold air creating a stable, perfect temperature between them that let both of them fly faster and more powerfully than they'd ever flown alone. They were like a single incredible creature, ice and fire together, moving through the blizzard as if it were nothing more than a light breeze. Emberclaw would find a valley packed with buried creatures and breathe a powerful stream of golden white fire, but Crystalwing was right beside him, directing it with precise gusts of icy breath, shaping the melt water away from the creatures, ensuring the fire went exactly where it was needed and nowhere it wasn't. Her ice didn't extinguish his fire, it guided it, made it more precise, more powerful, more beautiful than plain fire alone could ever be. And when the magical blizzard ice, thick and ancient and stubborn, resisted even Emberclaw's most powerful fire, Crystalwing would breathe a stream of her deepest cold right alongside his heat, and something extraordinary happened. Where ice met fire, where fire met ice, where they combined and swirled together, a new energy was created. A brilliant golden white light that crackled with power and warmth and, most importantly, broke through even the oldest magical ice as if it were made of nothing more than tissue paper. Together, they cleared the southern valley in less than an hour. They found dozens of woolly hedgehogs curled in frozen balls and breathed warm air over them until they uncurled, shook the ice from their spines, and squeaked with gratitude. They melted an entire mountain of ice that had buried a family of miniature elephants, who were very surprised to suddenly find themselves blinking in warm golden light, surrounded by two enormous dragons who were beaming with pride. They created a great glowing dome of combined ice and fire magic over Rainbow Meadow, like a giant snow globe filled with gentle, perfect warmth, so that all the smaller creatures of Dragonoria could shelter there safely while the blizzard raged outside. Then they flew to the northern valleys, and the eastern valleys, and the western valleys, always together, always combining their powers, always creating that extraordinary golden light where ice and fire met. The blizzard fought back. It threw its worst at them, mountains of hail, walls of hurricane wind, bolts of lightning made of frozen fire. But Crystalwing and Emberclaw just flew closer together, worked more tightly together, understood each other more perfectly with every passing hour, until the blizzard, ancient and terrible as it was, began, slowly, to tire. Yellowheart, because that is the secret of the great blizzard that nobody had ever known. It was powerful against those who faced it alone. But against friendship, real friendship, the kind born of difference and understanding and love, it had no power at all. Yellowheart. At last, After a whole day and a whole night of fighting, Crystalwing and Emberclaw flew to the very heart of the blizzard, right to the dark, screaming center of it, where the ancient magical ice gathered its power. They hovered there together, wingtip touching wingtip, looking at each other one last time. "Ready," said Emberclaw. "Together," said Crystalwing. And they breathed together, ice and fire at exactly the same moment, and the golden white light that exploded from the meeting of their breath was so brilliantly, magnificently bright that it lit up every corner of Dragonoria at once, like a second sun being born. Every creature in the land stopped and stared. And then, with a sound like a million tiny bells and a roar like a dragon's triumphant cry combined, the blizzard shattered, absolutely shattered, into a billion brilliant snowflakes that drifted down slowly, gently, beautifully over the whole land, each one catching the new light and glittering like a tiny rainbow of its own. The great blizzard was over. Morning after the great blizzard, Dragonoria woke up to the most extraordinary sight. Every surface was covered in a thin layer of sparkling, magical snow, but instead of being the dull white of ordinary snow, this snow glittered with 1,000 colors, because each snowflake that had burst from the destroyed blizzard carried a tiny fragment of the golden white light that Crystalwing and Emberclaw had created together. The whole land sparkled and shone like a giant jewel in the early morning sun, and the creatures of Dragonoria came out of their shelters and homes to stare in absolute wonder. Rainbow sparkles glowing star yellow heart rainbow. And there, on top of the highest hill in Rainbow Meadow, a hill that could be seen from every corner of Dragonoria, stood 2 dragons, side by side. One blue and silver and sparkling with ice. One red and gold and glowing with fire. Their wings were folded comfortably close together, and between them, where their wingtips just barely touched, a gentle, perpetual shower of tiny golden sparks drifted down like warm snowflakes. They looked tired. They looked happy. They looked like exactly what they were, best friends who had just done something truly extraordinary together. The creatures of Dragonoria came from everywhere to celebrate. The woolly hedgehogs brought armfuls of the most fragrant forest flowers as gifts. The miniature elephants formed a trumpet choir and played the most jubilant, joyful songs. The silver rabbits built a monument out of moonstone right in the center of Rainbow Meadow, a statue of 2 dragons flying together, ice and fire wings intertwined. The talking tortoises composed an epic poem about the battle of the Great Blizzard that they would recite at every festival from that day forward. The blue foxes organized a feast that went on for 3 days and featured every kind of delicious food you could imagine. Crystalwing and Emberclaw ate an embarrassing number of toasted marshmallows. Crystalwing discovered she loved them even more than Emberclaw did, which surprised them both considerably. They laughed together at the tortoise's dramatic poem, which made everything sound far more dangerous than it had actually felt at the time. The tortoises would not be persuaded to change a single word. They danced with the woolly hedgehogs, carefully. They trumpeted along with the miniature elephant's choir. Crystalwing's voice was a clear, ringing ice bell soprano. Emberclaw's was a deep, warm, rumbling bass. Together they sounded rather magnificent. Party Popper, for the first time in all of Dragonoria's long and beautiful history, there was a party with 2 dragons at it. And it was, by every account, the best party that had ever been held. Party Popper. In the weeks and months that followed, Crystalwing and Emberclaw rebuilt the bridge, the right way this time, with no arguments and plenty of laughter. They built it exactly as they had talked about in their first attempt, but better, because now they truly understood each other. The left half was Crystalwing's ice, elegant arches, crystal railings, snowflake patterns carved along every surface that caught the light and made little rainbows dance on the valley below. The right half was Emberclaw's lava rock, strong pillars, fierce and magnificent carved dragons on every column, the rock polished to a warm dark red glow. And in the very middle, where the 2 halves met, the keystone was something entirely new, a beautiful fusion of ice and hardened fire, swirled together in an eternal golden pattern, neither fully ice nor fully fire, but something magical and new that only they could make together. They named the bridge of both, and it became one of the most famous and beautiful structures in all of Dragonoria, and creatures came from far and wide just to walk across it and feel the way the cool misty air from the ice side met the gentle warm breath from the fire side right at the middle, creating that same perfect temperature. Not too hot, not too cold, but exactly and completely right. "You know what I think," said Crystalwing one evening, as they sat side by side in the middle of their bridge, watching the sun set over Dragonoria in every shade of orange and pink and purple. Emberclaw had helpfully pointed out that all of those colors happened to be very similar to fire colors. Crystalwing had helpfully pointed out that they also looked quite a lot like the inside of an ice crystal at sunset. They had agreed to disagree and then agreed they were both right. What do you think? Asked Emberclaw contentedly, absently breathing a small firework that burst into gold and silver sparks above their heads. I think all those old legends were wrong, said Crystalwing softly. They said ice dragons and fire dragons could never be friends. They said we were too different. But I think being different is the whole point. I couldn't have defeated the blizzard without your fire. You couldn't have navigated it without my ice. The bridge of both only exists because we are different. Everything wonderful that we've made together, it only exists because we are different. Emberclaw was quiet for a moment. He watched his little firework fade into the dusky sky. Then he smiled his wide, warm, fire-colored smile. I think, he said, that you might be the wisest ice dragon who has ever lived. And I think, replied Crystalwing, that you might be the kindest fire dragon who has ever lived. They sat in happy, comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars come out one by one. Then Crystalwing began to hum, her clear, bell-like voice rising gently into the night air, and after a moment, Emberclaw joined in with his deep, warm rumble. Their voices wove together the way their powers did, perfectly, surprisingly, beautifully, filling the night sky over Dragonoria with a song that wasn't quite an ice song or a fire song, but something better than either. Something new. Something that made every creature in the land, from the woolly hedgehogs to the talking tortoises to the blue foxes to the silver rabbits to the miniature elephants, look up from whatever they were doing and smile, though they couldn't quite say why. From that day forward, Crystalwing and Emberclaw were together every single day. They showed the creatures of Dragonoria that differences were not something to be afraid of. They were something to be celebrated, because differences were where the most interesting, most wonderful, most unexpected things came from. They held yearly festivals in Rainbow Meadow to celebrate the bridge of both, with fireworks made of ice and firelight and ice sculptures and marshmallow roasts. They taught young dragons, both ice and fire, how to work together, how to understand each other, and most importantly, how to apologize sincerely when you got things wrong. And every night, the creatures of Dragonoria could look up at the two great mountains, one dusted with sparkling ice, one glowing with warm fire, and see two small lights, one blue-white, one gold-red, close together at the top. Two dragons, singing to the stars. Two dragons who had been very lonely, who had taken a chance on being brave and curious and kind, and had found in each other the greatest friendship that Dragonoria had ever known.